We'd like to welcome everyone to our Wednesday night service. Before Brother James gets up here and gives us our lesson, we'll open with a prayer. Will you bow with me? Lord, thank you for giving us this opportunity to be able to come here tonight, to be able to worship and study your word. Lord, please be with us as Brother James gives us the lesson. Let's keep our minds open and take what is taught tonight and apply it to our lives so that we may be a better example and live a better life. Lord, please be with the sick that was unable to make it here tonight. Just be with them and heal whatever illness ails them. Lord, as Mr. James gives our lesson, let's just keep our worldly issues out and just pay attention and take whatever is said and apply it to our lives. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
It's good to have you tonight as we continue our survey, and we're looking at Nehemiah chapter 2. And those of you who are wondering about a handout, there is not one. I'm still working on the Ezra introduction outline that I gave you, and working on the return, the third return from captivity, when Nehemiah goes back and is going back to rebuild the wall. And we began looking at that last time. Started in 444 BC when Nehemiah returned with permission from Artaxerxes I and with support from the government. And we had noticed down through Nehemiah 2:10 that Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite and others we'll see later are disturbed that Nehemiah has come to seek the well-being, the welfare of the children of Israel. Now this Sanballat and Tobiah will be thorns in the sides of the children of Israel as they seek to rebuild the wall, because they do not want the wall rebuilt. They do not want Jerusalem rebuilt. They do not want Israel to prosper. So, in response to their being upset, verse 11, we're looking at Nehemiah, a leader, and we're seeing some examples, some characteristics of leadership as we look at Nehemiah. Verse 11, I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night. Notice that, in the night. I and a few men with me, I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. So he got up at night, and we might say this is a stealth mission. He is not telling others what he's doing. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuse or the dung gate, and surveyed or examined, viewed the walls of Jerusalem which were broken down, and its gates which were burned with fire. Now this takes us back to the third carrying away in 586 BC when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the city and the temple. And here we learn that they broke down the walls and burned the gates of the city. Then I went on to the fountain gate. Now if you can find a drawing or information in your study Bible on Solomon's temple, and that shows all these gates, you'll get an idea of that temple complex. And to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal under me to pass, so I went up in the night by the valley, that's a wadi, a dry riverbed, and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials, Tobiah would be one of them, did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. Now, a mark of a good leader is that he surveys the situation, gathers proper information before he leads anyone to do anything. So you see him gathering this information, taking time to survey the work that is to be done, what's going to be needed, how many people will be needed, how are we going to approach this. Now that's what a leader does. He doesn't wait and then react to something that's going on. He's taking the leadership position. All right, so he hadn't told anyone. Then I said to them, now he gathers them together and he informs them. You see the distress that we're in, how Jerusalem lies, and we have here, what do you have? Waste, desolate, forsaken, and its gates are burned with fire. Notice he began by getting on common ground with these people. We're all in agreement of the distress. We're all in agreement about the damage. We can all see that. We can all agree on that. Then notice what he said, come. A leader leads, he doesn't drive. He didn't say go, he said come. Notice second, and let us. A leader includes himself in the work that's to be done. He doesn't just order someone to get it done. Let us. One of the great ways to gain some of the principles of the book of Hebrews is to look at the let us phrases all the way through the book. Look at what's involved when the writer of the Hebrews says, let us do this, that, or the other. So here you have a leader that's out front leading, and he says, come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. All right? Here's the mission. Here's what we need to do. A leader has a plan. He explains the plan. What we need to do, we need to rebuild this wall. Why? Because all of us see that it's torn down. Now, some of our kinfolks were back there. And you know, very likely, there was one or more, probably wearing a baseball cap, pushed it back on his head and scratched his head and said something like, doesn't look too bad to me. Why are we going to expend all this energy? There's always one. But notice Nehemiah is in the lead. That's important. And I told them of the hand of my God. Notice the personal relationship, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. All right, he gives them the information that God is behind this project, and so is Artaxerxes. So we're not out here doing something, number one, against the law, that's going to bring reprisal from the capital in Susa, nor are we doing anything that's against the will of Jehovah. My God was good to me and brought me here. So he said twice, let us rise up and build. Let's do it together. Then they, now notice that. You've had let us 2 times, now then they. The New King James here says, then they set their hands to work. Literally, they strengthened their hands to work. Let us is unity. Let us is we're not in this by ourselves. We're all together in this. You're not going to be hung out, as it were, to dry. And so let's rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. So here, leadership results in fellowship. Come, let us. We'll follow a man like that. Circle it. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, now we hear the third fellow, and Geshem the Arab heard, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? All right, now they're bringing accusation. Are you going to rebel against the king? Nehemiah said, I'm concerned that we're a reproach. We represent God. We don't need to be a reproach. He inspired these people to work. They said, let's go. You mark it down. If you're doing a godly work, you will have opposition from the outside. And sometimes you will have opposition from the inside. So here are these three. What are you doing? They laughed at us. Does it bother you to be laughed at when you're doing right? We might need a course for young converts in how to do right in spite of being laughed at. We don't like for people to laugh at us, make fun of us, ridicule us. It's intimidating to some people. But that's one of the devil's tools. And then they said, you're rebelling against the government. Now, those of you who know the original meaning of my word, that's stupidity. And stupidity means what? Ignorance. That's ignorance. The king is financing this expedition. But they're speaking out of ignorance. Anything they can say to discourage the people. And when you are opposed, when you're doing right, you need to mark this in your mind. Consider the source of whatever is said or done. Consider the source. Now notice verse 20. So I answered them. A leader does not let opposition stop the work. And he answered them. Now I need to make this clear to all of us. Sometimes when people say things about us or against us, they have to be answered. You can't let it ride, because too much is at stake. Now he's told these people, God's with me, the king is with us. But these men are trying to plant doubt in the minds of the people building the wall. But on the other hand, there are some times when people say things that don't need to be answered. They don't deserve an answer. They're so ridiculous that we answer them with our lives instead of with our mouths. And wisdom is knowing the difference. When Saul was anointed king, the text says there were some worthless men there who said, "How can this man help us?" And I love the reading of the American Standard here, in the margin, where it says, Saul was as though he were a deaf man. He ignored it, didn't deserve an answer. So wisdom sometimes said, that doesn't deserve an answer, I'm not getting in an argument over it. But this one needed to be answered. So Nehemiah answered them and said to them, and notice where he started. The God of heaven, what's your next word? Himself. He. The God of heaven himself. That's an emphasis there. The God of heaven himself will, everybody have will? Not may, not could, not we hope. He will prosper us. You're on the losing side, fellas. You're fighting God. You're going to lose. The God of heaven himself will prosper us. Conclusion. Do y'all have conclusion there? Therefore, we, his servants. That sounds a lot like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah in Daniel 3. Our God, whom we serve, will deliver us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise, and we will build. Circle it. But you won't work with us. You have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. We'll build this wall, but you won't be involved in it. There comes a time in leadership when you withdraw fellowship from people. Those who are antagonistic to the will of God, who are not going to repent, you're not going to fellowship that. You're not going to tolerate that. You're not going to honor that. And Nehemiah said, you don't have anything to do with this work. You don't have a heritage in Jerusalem. All right, what's your first word? And what you have is chapter 3. Then, I kind of tell you, don't click. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priest, and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They built as far as the Tower of the 100, consecrated it. Then as far as the Tower of Hananiah. Next, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zaccur, the son of Imri, built. Also, verse 4, next to them. Verse 5, next to them. Verse 6, moreover. Verse 7, next to them. Verse 8, next to him. Verse 9, next to them. Verse 10, next to them. Verse 11, Malchijah built another section. Verse 12, next to him. Verse 13, Hanun and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. Verse 14, Malchiah, leader of the district of Beth Hesserim, repaired the refuse gate. He built it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars, and on and on and on, all the way through this chapter. And you end up in verse 32, between the upper room at the corner, as far as the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants made repairs. Now, I want you to notice the involvement of everybody in this work. And I want you to notice that each of them had a particular section of the wall to build. What do you have here? What do you see here in what Nehemiah has accomplished so far? Building the wall. A lot of help. Organized. Teamwork. Leadership. What don't you see here? Griping and grumbling. What else? You don't see folks standing around with their hands in their pockets, do you? Which tells you they don't work for a municipality. You don't see people standing around and just looking at one another. You see people who are active and are involved and are busy and are energetic. So would you say they have bought into this project? They have made it their own. They own it. Leadership encourages ownership. And when I own something, I don't mind working for it. And leaders help people feel ownership. This is not what they are doing. This is what we are doing. And here's my responsibility, and I'm going to do it to the very best of my ability. I promise you, you did not have any slipshod work on these sections of the wall. You didn't have cutting corners. Do it as quickly and cheaply as it can be done. You had people working with all their might to build that wall because they owned that section of the wall. Now, in church work, do you own the mission work that we're supporting? Do you see it as your work, or do you see it as we're sending a check every month? Do you own my work? What I'm doing, is that a part of you? Do you have a part in that? Is that your work? Or is it what somebody else is doing? You see, when you own it, you put all you have into it. And that's what these people did. Now, I need to ask myself, is that what I'm doing at Smyrna? Do I own the work we're doing? And if I do, I'm putting everything I have into it. So chapter 3 is a tremendously encouraging chapter. And you see all these people working. What's the first word in chapter 4 as you have it? All right, people working hard, that wall's coming up. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was what? What? Wroth, King James? He was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. Now notice, they laughed at us. That didn't stop us. Now they're mad at us, and they're mocking us. How far into the new covenant and the instituting of the new covenant, the establishing of the new covenant, how far do we get before we find people mocking? Anybody know?
Immediately, because they were talking about they were full of new wine.
All right. We don't even get the first sermon preached before they're mocking. Others mocked. Now, when Paul is preaching to Gentile philosophers in Acts 17, he used one word, resurrection. And they laughed out loud, interrupted the speech. Opposition. They heard we're building that wall. We didn't let their laughing at us and deriding us discourage us. We went on with the work, so now they're getting worse. Now, I will tell you that wrath, what does King James say? Wrath and what? Great indignation. Now, that's worse than just upset, okay? That's not mild. That's, we say, we misuse the word, but we say they're mad. You know, that's what Felix accused Paul of being when he preached the gospel. Your much learning has made you mad, out of your head. And they mocked the Jews, and he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria. So here you see the northern section. These are where these Samaritans are. And said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Derision. Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? They've already been offering sacrifices. Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish that are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside himself. Do you have that? Everybody have beside himself? He was what? All right, he was beside him, standing there by Sanballat. It's kind of like they laid down their garments at a fellow's feet, and he was egging them on. And he said, whatever they build, if even a fox goes up, he will break down their stone wall. People are going to ridicule you if you're doing right. Now, in verse 4, here's what a leader does when he's facing opposition and ridicule. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads, and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked to anger before the builders. That's called imprecation. Imprecation. That's calling on Jehovah to visit on these people what they wish was visited on Nehemiah and the Jews. Now, when you study the book of Psalms, you're going to read a section of Psalms, various Psalms, that are called imprecatory Psalms, where the psalmist calls on Jehovah to punish the enemy. That's imprecation. And that's what you have here. So Nehemiah, a leader, when he's doing right, is ridiculed, takes it to God. Notice Nehemiah didn't gather an army and go after these folks, whip up on them. He turned it over to God. You punish them. Seems like Romans 12 has some kind of wording in it, something like, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith Jehovah. So what'd you do? I turned it over to God, and I sat around and sulked for a while because I was being mistreated. No, that's the New Imagination Version. Look at verse 6. So we built the wall. Now they're mocking, they're deriding, they're laughing, we're building. Whose side would you like to identify? Where would you want to be? We built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height. Now, if you mark in your Bible, for the people had a what? A mind to work. What does that mean? They went at it with all their ability. They were willing to work. So the agging on, the mocking, the ridicule, just fired these people up to work harder. That's what it ought to do with us. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored, and the gaps, you may have breaches, were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry. Do you see growing intensity? They're not backing down either. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and do what? What does your translation say there? Sir? Hinder it. New King James, create confusion. Create confusion. We're going to attack now. All right, now you have physical assault. Prior, you'd had verbal assault. Now you have physical assault threatened. All right, what's your first word in verse 9? Even in spite of all that, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. What two things did these Jews do in response to the threat of attack? Prayed first. All right, they prayed and they prepared by being ready to defend themselves if they needed to. So, when you pray to God, you have your part in the answer. They didn't stand around and say, well, it's up to God now. We'll just stand here and watch them as they come against us and He'll somehow miraculously deliver us. They set a watch. Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is falling or failing, and there is so much rubbish that we're not able to build the wall. Now they're getting tired. They're being worn down by the physical work. They're being worn down by the mental assaults. And our adversaries said, now see what they're saying is getting to some of them, to Judah. They will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So we're going to come when you're building the wall and you're not paying attention, and we'll hit you before you know it, and you'll be dead, and this work will stop. Threats. Threats. So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. All right, Nehemiah, how are you going to respond to that? As a result of that, therefore, I positioned behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows, self-defense. The Bible teaches self-defense is legitimate when called upon. And I looked. I'm setting up a defense here. I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be what? One of the messages of the Bible from the garden onward, don't be afraid. When sin entered the world, what is the first result of it listed? We were naked and afraid, and we hid ourselves. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and do what? fight. Fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Don't be afraid. How do you deal with a bully? You have to stand up to him. That's the only way you can deal with a bully. And that's what Nehemiah says. Don't let him run over you. And it happened when our enemies heard that it was known to us. Now notice this. And God had brought their plot to what? To naught, to nothing. That all of us returned to the wall, everyone to his work. Question. How did God bring their plot to nothing? How did he do it? Work a miracle?
Them standing up, being ready.
He strengthened them to stand their ground. And how did he strengthen them?
He told them that he'd take care of it.
All right, he told them, I'm with you. What or whom did he use to strengthen their hands? A leader, Nehemiah. When Nehemiah didn't tuck and run, what influence did it have on the rest of them? Now, when your leader runs away, what influence is that going to have on the followers? They lose all their courage, don't they? So you have a leader here that stands. How did Stonewall Jackson get his name during the war?
Not backing down, going forward.
In the middle of a battle, instead of standing back, he was a general. He was on his horse leading the troops, and they said, there is Jackson standing like a stone wall. And he encouraged the troops by his leadership. Here's Nehemiah standing like a stone wall while he's building a wall. Leaders. And so we went back to work. Okay, you've had your little discouragement session now. We're going back to work. So it was from that time on that half of my servants worked at construction, while the other half held the spears, the shields, the bows, and the armor, and the leaders were behind all the house of Judah. So you got your leaders behind them, you've got the people with the artillery there, half of them building, half of them defending. Those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction, and with the other hand they did a what? They held a weapon. Come on, boys. You want to attack us? Come on. We're ready. Every one of the builders had his sword girded at his side as he built, and the one who sounded the trumpet was beside me. So you have Nehemiah, the leader, walking the wall, looking for an attack so he could sound the trumpet. Then I said to the nobles, the rulers, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive, and we're separated far from one another on the wall, all right? He saw a weak spot. Leaders recognize weak spots. He said, we're too far apart from each other. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. How will our God fight for us? Through our wielding the sword and the spear. Our God will see to it we win, but we do our part. So we labored in the work, and half of the men held the spears from daybreak until the stars appeared, At the same time, I also said to the people, let each man and his servant stay at night in Jerusalem, that they may be our guard by night and a working party by day. All right, we're going to stay here. We're going to guard this wall until we get through. So neither I, my brethren, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me took off our clothes, except that everyone took them off for washing. The only time we changed clothes was when we took a bath. That's dedication, folks. That's staying with it. And there was a great outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brethren. All right, now, okay, they didn't get us from the outside. Let's see what we can stir up among ourselves. For there were those who said, we, our sons and our daughters of many, therefore let us get grain that we may eat and live. There were also some who said, we have mortgaged our lands and vineyards and houses that we might buy grain because of the famine. Now you see another problem they're facing. There's a shortage of food. There were also those who said, we borrowed money for the king's tax on our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and indeed we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have been brought into slavery. Now that goes back to the Pentateuch, where if you owed a debt, you could sell yourself into bondage to pay off the debt, to work off the debt. It is not in our power to redeem them, that is, pay the debt for them, buy them out of slavery. For other men have our lands and vineyards. Now listen to Nehemiah's response. And I became very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. What does your translation say in verse 7? Then I consulted. The New King James says, after serious thought. You don't fly off in reaction. Think it through. Think your response through. After serious thought, I rebuked the nobles and rulers and said to them, each of you is exacting, and do you have this word, usury? Everybody have that word? All of you use that word on a daily basis. You accountants, y'all use that word, usury. Sir? Occasion. Was it even in your textbooks? After the test, I'm through with that. What is it? It's interest on money. Charging interest from your brethren. So I called a great assembly against them, and I said to them, according to our ability, we have redeemed our Jewish brethren who were sold to the nations. Now indeed, will you even sell your brethren? Or should they be sold to us? Then they were silenced and found nothing to say. Then I said, what you are doing is not what? Now listen, when internally things are being done that aren't good, leaders call it out. They don't ignore it. They don't gloss over it. Yeah, we have opposition from without, but we need to sweep around our doorsteps for some things. So Nehemiah says, what you're doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? You're acting like the world. I also, with my brethren and my servants, are lending them money and grain. Please let us stop this usury, this interest. Nehemiah said, I'm not just talking. I put my money where my mouth is. Restore now to them, even this day. Notice that. We're not talking about 5 years down the line. We're not having a business meeting and talk about it next month. We're going to do it right now. There's a time for action, like shooting bells. They need to be done right then. If you don't, they'll reproduce like rabbits. Restore now to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses, also 100th of the money and the grain, the new wine and the oil that you have charged them. So they said, oh, we can't afford to do that. Is that what they said? They said, we will restore, and will require nothing from them. We will do as you say. Look at leadership saying, come on, let us. Then I called the priest and required an oath from them that they would do according to this promise. Now, Jews didn't break oaths. Then I shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out each man from his house and from his property who does not perform this promise. Shaking out his garment was a picture of God's disfellowshipping those who violated the promise. We call that an object lesson. Even thus may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said what? All the assembly said what? Amen. What does that mean? So it be. We're on board. And praise Jehovah. Then the people did according to this promise. Now notice, you have a leader that has to deal with outside problems. You have a leader that has to deal with inside problems. And he didn't run away from any of them. If you're going to be a leader in the Lord's church, you don't run from problems, you run to them. And you deal with them according to God's will. Thank you for listening and participating. I know those of you on social media have had some difficulty finding us just because we weren't there. But we were trying, so don't be impatient with us. We'll be on every time we can get us on. Lord willing, Sunday morning at 10 a.m.